Christmas Quilt by Vannetta Chapman, Chapter 12. Annie pushed the crochet needle into her yarn and the yarn into her quilting bag. Leah had begun to stir as soon as Dr. Kentley walked into the room. It was nice to see Gabriella trail in behind him. The clock on the wall said 10 minutes after 3. Either Gabriella's replacement was late, which was doubtful, or she was staying around to complete final rounds with Dr. Kentley. Annie made eye contact with the woman and nodded her thanks. "I can't believe I fell asleep." Leah's expression turned sheepish as she accepted a cup of water from the nurse. "Your body's adjusting to a lot of things," Annie said. "Sleep is one way of coping." "Leah and Adam, I'd like to talk to you about your test results." Dr. Kentley's expression appeared very grave. He continued staring at the screen on the tablet, apparently scrolling through reports. Finally, he handed it back to Gabriella. "I assume you want Annie to stay in the room while I go over this?" "Yeah, we do." Adam had been standing near the window, but he moved closer to her and Leah, not stopping until he was standing shoulder to shoulder with Annie, who was right next to Leah's bed. Everything about Adam's posture and their position together seemed to scream red alert, as if together they would be able to confront whatever was coming next and draw strength from one another. Annie prayed they could. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The ultrasound indicates the babies aren't as developed as we thought." "You said their heartbeat was good." Adam ran his fingers over and through his curly hair, sending it into complete disarray. Dr. Kentley held up his hand, palm out. "Yes, and that hasn't changed. However, since this is your first sonogram, Belinda was guessing at your exact date of conception. You thought you were going into your 36th week. The sonogram you had a few hours ago also suggests the babies may be younger." "How much younger?" Annie asked. She understood where the doctor was headed now and why he was worried. She also knew that Adam and Leah were lost as to why this was so important. 10 days, certainly a little more than a week. "So what does this mean?" Leah spoke as she placed a protective hand over her stomach. "That the babies aren't actually due at the end of December. Instead, they're due at the first week in January." "Yes," Dr. Kentley drew out the word. "But Leah, you're not going to make it until January. My goal, our goal, will be for you to make it until December. Another 2 weeks, if you can wait to deliver until then. The chances of complications will be much less." "Complications?" Adam's voice hardened. "What type of complications?" "Low birth rate is tied to many things. We don't have to go into those now." "Tell us, we need to know. If we're to make informed decisions." Adam gripped the side rail of the bed with both hands. Annie glanced down and saw that his knuckles were white. His grasp on the rail was so fierce. "Leah and I are adults," Adam continued. "We are parents to these children, even though they aren't born yet. Now, what are the complications?" The doctor didn't avoid the question. Instead, he moved his gaze from Adam to Leah and then back again. "Infants with low birth weights have an increased risk for a wide variety of problems, everything from mental retardation to cerebral palsy. There can also be vision or hearing loss. This doesn't mean your babies would have these problems if they were born early, only that they could." "What about their lungs?" Annie asked. "Should be fine up to 34 weeks. We administer a steroid called benzone to help develop the baby's lungs more quickly." "But the contractions have stopped," Leah protested. "And that's a good sign. Also, you're definitely past 34 weeks, so the steroid isn't necessary. Our problem is that your babies are very small." Dr. Kentley handed the tablet to Gabriella and pushed his hands into the pockets of his lab coat. "What I'm going to suggest will be very difficult for you, I suspect. I've worked with other Amish families over the years, and I understand your ties to your family and your home. In my opinion, Leah needs to be under close observation for the rest of this week and all of next until the baby's past the 36-week mark. You want her to stay here?" Adam's voice rose in disbelief. "In Lewistown? For 2 weeks?" No, I don't. We don't have the facilities here. Don't have a neonatal unit. I'd like to transfer her to a hospital that does." Annie closed her eyes. Some part of her had known this might be coming. When they'd first stepped into the corridor of the Lewistown Hospital, she'd known this might be the first of several stops. Another hospital? Adam turned and began pacing back and forth across the 5 feet in front of the window. What other hospital? Where? There are several good facilities in Philadelphia. Adam sank into the chair, speechless, his mouth half open. The room grew so quiet that the sound of the clock ticking increased until Annie thought it would surely plop off the wall. Then she remembered her time working at Mercy, her time of Rumspringa. "Adam, Mercy Hospital has a neonatal unit." He stared at her as if she had spoken in French. "It's true," Dr. Kentley said. "We've transferred to Mercy before." "I was on staff there for a while," Annie explained. She turned to Leah. "It's a good place. They're one of the top medical facilities in the state with kind people, and it's a quiet, gentle setting." Leah glanced around the room. Adam was now sitting with his head between his hands as if he were suffering from a throbbing headache. "I have to go to the bathroom," Leah said abruptly, as if the conversation going on around her was not where she'd be spending the next 2 weeks and where her children would most likely be born. "Oh, all right." And Annie lowered the safety rail on the side of the bed. "Let me help you." Gabriella moved to adjust the pole holding the 2 IV bags. Together they assisted Leah, being sure she was steady on her feet, before helping her shuffle over to the small bathroom. What happened next happened so quickly that even Annie would never later have trouble telling Samuel about it when she called him on the hospital room phone. It seemed Leah cried out with the sound like a small animal caught in a trap. She tried to collapse to the floor, but Gabriella and Annie were both there on either side of her, and they held her by her arms before she could do more than sink an inch or so. The blood spreading down her legs and onto the floor was substantial, and when Adam saw it, he turned white and fainted dead away. Dr. Kentley strode to the wall and hit the emergency button, calling for help. Then he was at their side. Together they picked Leah up and placed her back on the bed. By that time, she too had lost consciousness. Leah woke in a different room. She opened her eyes and fought through the fog to remember all that had happened. More than anything, she wanted to raise her hand, caress her stomach, her baby's, but her hand was so heavy she couldn't. So instead she focused on Annie, who was sitting a few feet away. In her lap she held the white fabric they'd picked out together, and she seemed to be working on one of the appliques for the baby quilt. She turned the fabric toward the window where the blinds were partially open to allow a patch of light through. Leah could make out the dark and light blue fabric Annie had chosen to use in one of the sunbonnet Sue dresses. Tears stung her eyes and began to roll down her cheeks. Surely her babies were okay. Annie wouldn't be making the quilt if anything had happened. Sensing Leah was awake, Annie raised her eyes. She didn't move immediately. Instead, a slow, full smile replaced the look of concentration. She glanced down, worked her sewing needle into the edge of her quilt block, and placed the fabric in her quilting bag. Standing, she adjusted the blinds to allow even more light into the room, then walked to the side of the bed and poured a cup of water from the pitcher on the bedside table. "It's good to see your eyes open." She used the control pad to raise the head of the bed. "Try to drink a little. I imagine your mouth feels as though you've been swallowing cotton." Leah nodded. She managed to lift her hand to help with the cup, but her arm felt weak and unsteady. She noticed the IV was still in, though this time it was in her opposite arm. With both hands, she gingerly touched her stomach. The babies weren't moving, but her abdomen was as large as ever, and that was a comfort. "The Boplin are good. You can see their heartbeats on this monitor." Annie pointed to a digital display were two lines marched constantly from left to right. A number showed brightly above each line. The number, it's what it should be. Yes. Annie offered her another drink, and this time she finished what was in her cup. Leah stared around the room, trying to piece together the fragments of what she remembered and separate it from her dreams. There were now two chairs in her room, the one Annie had been quilting in and one closer to her bed. Annie sat in it and waited. I don't remember a lot. Leah's voice was scratchy, like the time she'd had a cold for a week and missed school. We were talking with the older doctor, Dr. Kentley, and I had to. She glanced around the room, her gaze finally landing on the bathroom door, which was now to the left of the door leading out to the hall. I had to use the toilet. Something terrible? Annie nodded, but didn't interrupt. I think Leah could feel her heart beating faster. Had it been a dream or had it happened? I think I remember a lot of blood and maybe you praying over me. Or did I dream that? Reaching for her hand, Annie laced their fingers together. You didn't dream it. And then I don't remember very much clearly. Faces, some I didn't know and some I did. She stared down at their hands. But the Boplin are all right? Yes, now they are. Why did they place me in a different room? The surprise showed on Annie's face. We're not at Lewistown anymore. You began bleeding because your placenta separated partially from your uterine lining. When that happened, the doctors at Lewistown stabilized you, gave you a blood transfusion, and then transferred you here to Mercy. In Philadelphia? Yes, an ambulance brought you, and I rode along. Adam, he rode with Belinda. Adam was here for a while. Leah fingered the white bed covering, digesting all that Annie had said. She'd had a blood transfusion. She'd ridden in an ambulance again. Why can't I remember any of this? You slept through much of it, and sometimes when you've been through a traumatic experience, your mind chooses not to remember. It could be bits and pieces will come back later. Leah nodded as if she understood, but she didn't. None of what Annie had said made any sense at all. She closed her eyes and began to pray, thanking God her babies had strong hearts, that whatever had happened while she was in the hospital, and that Annie was there to explain things to her. She liked receiving information slowly so she could process it, think about it, and pray about it. She didn't consider herself stupid, but everything had happened so fast. She needed time to digest all these changes. Annie must have thought she'd fallen asleep. She patted her hand, placed it under the blanket, and stood to move back to her quilting. Explain to me about the placenta again. It's what provides oxygen and nutrients to your Boplin. But it tore? Yes, not completely, or you would have gone into labor. There was a lot of blood. Leah didn't open her eyes. Yes, it was my blood, though, not the baby's. Correct? Leah opened her eyes. I don't mind losing my blood. I know you don't, but we have to keep you strong, and we have to keep the placenta attached as long as possible. Nodding, Leah tried to absorb all that Annie was saying. When did Adam go home? Wednesday night, when the doctor said all three of you were out of danger. Leah stared out the window. For the first time, she noticed that beyond the blinds were many buildings, an entire city she hadn't even realized surrounded her. He calls every night. He goes to our house and uses Samuel's phone. Tears threatened to spill again, but Leah blinked them back. It was time to be strong for both her husband and her children. Her mind and heart were flooded with memories of Adam holding her on their bathroom floor, his arms around her, his heartbeat against her skin. She knew how much he cared for her, and she wouldn't doubt him again. So I'll stay here until it's time. Yes, the doctors, you have two, hope to postpone the birth 2 more weeks until at least December the 7th. Leah closed her eyes. 2 more weeks without Adam here in the middle of Philadelphia. She wanted to shout or cry or throw something. Instead, she pulled in 2 deep, steadying breaths. When she opened her eyes, Annie was studying her, waiting. We're both going to need something to help us pass the hours. It's a good thing you brought that quilt. The fabric isn't as stiff as if it's been washed. My landlady did that for me. Landlady? Perhaps this was all a dream. Maybe she'd wake up in a little while and be back on the bathroom floor, Adam behind her, waiting for Annie and Samuel to arrive. Annie retrieved the quilting bag and settled in the chair next to the bed, adjusting the blinds again so even more light spilled across the floor. Leah noticed more details now, like the cozy feel of the room. The walls were a warm rose color, and there were 2 shelves across from her bed, she supposed for flowers. Englishers were big on purchasing what grew freely in the fields. There was something she and Adam had laughed over when they passed the small florist in town. Since there were no flowers on her shelf, someone had placed a small ceramic jar painted blue with yellow daisies. It brightened up the place and helped Leah think of summer. Above the second shelf hung a small decorative cross. It was wooden, simple, and seemed to be made of maple. Whoever made it had shellacked it so that the grains of the wood shone. Leah couldn't help thinking of Annie's Uncle Eli. He would appreciate the workmanship by whoever had made the symbol of their faith. Though Amish didn't normally decorate with crosses, somehow this one brought her a sense of peace. Family aren't allowed to spend the night, Annie was explaining. It was Samuel's idea for me to contact my old landlady, the one I lived with when I was working here. She happened to have a room open, a small one with 2 twin beds, so I took it. And you're walking back and forth? Leah glanced out the window. Though the sun was shining, it was nearly Thanksgiving. Surely the temperature was cold. It isn't far, a few blocks. I walked when I lived here before. Actually, I enjoy the stroll. Leah watched her as Annie ran her fingers around the sunbonnet Sue dress. So your landlady washed and ironed the fabric? I know you and your quilting ways. You always do both first. Annie nodded agreement. Yes, she did. Vicky asked if there was anything she could do for you, and I admitted I'd like to be working on your quilt. Sounds like quite the landlady. Indeed she is, but there was no more quilting that morning. One of the nurses came in, and yes, it brought a smile to Leah's face to see her. She wore the same long, conservative dress and the same nurse's cap that Annie had worn that first evening so long ago when she'd come home to care for Jacob. She peeked at Annie and knew that she was remembering the same thing. Then they were both grinning. As the nurse was about charting Leah's status and performing her various duties, Annie explained that what they found so amusing. After all, Samuel's confusion over Annie's clothing had been in the beginning of their relationship, a relationship which resulted in their marriage and the child she was carrying. I remember hearing about you, Nurse Penny admitted. She was taller than Annie and bigger, not in a soft way, but strong. Leah had no doubt she could handle whatever needed doing. Her skin was very white with freckles across the bridge of her nose, and her hair was short and bright red. Mercy Hospital was famous for a while when Annie worked there. We became quite the talk because we had an Amish nurse. We still have one, Leah piped up. I suppose you do, Penny cocked her head. I've been nursing 10 years, and if I walked away from my job today, I'd still be a nurse, now wouldn't I? Leah and Annie both nodded. But I won't be walking away, Miss Leah. We're going to see those babies through to the day of their birth, when you and your husband will hold them in your arms. She adjusted the bed so that Leah was more comfortable. Now I'll send someone to help you with your shower in about an hour. You rest up until then. After she'd left the room, Leah turned to Annie. You were right. This is the best place for me to be. Yeah, they're good here. You can see why I accepted a job when they offered one. I felt comfortable working with the staff. It's as if they've kept some of the old ways with their manner of dress and the simple furnishings. Also, the way they treat people. Yes, that too, but they have the newest technology, medically speaking. I'm glad Dr. Kentley agreed to transfer you to Mercy. Leah studied her sister-in-law. Do you ever miss it? You spent a lot of time studying, working to earn your nursing certification. I know how much it means to you to be able to help others. I still help others as God sees fit. That's true. I don't miss the city. Annie turned and stared out the window. It's always crowded in around me. I endured it so I could learn the things I wanted to know. The hospital, this place, was like a sanctuary, and I admit I do miss it at times. I miss the people and the children, of course. Leah nodded. But I no longer question my decision. God asked us to make sacrifices at different times in our life. Mine was small, to give up a job so that I can work alongside Samuel and help those in our community and have a family of my own. I surrendered one dream for something better than I could have ever imagined.